welcome to Have a Biscuit, Potter. In this episode, we discuss why you don't just ignore Professor McGonagall's text messages in the discussion of Chapter 3 of The Philosopher's Stone, called The Letters from No One. In this chapter, Harry gets some letters apparently from no one, but actually from the wonderful deputy headmistress of Hogwarts. Uncle Vernon is not so keen on them, and he tries his hardest to escape those letters. This podcast may contain some swearing and will definitely contain some spoilers. But before we get into the chapter, let me just remind you of Professor McGonagall's office hour, which is your opportunity to get some life advice from Professor McGonagall. Obviously not from the real Professor McGonagall, because she is a fictional character. However, I will try my best to answer your question in a way that McGonagall would approve of. To ask your questions, go on Twitter and use the hashtag AskMcGonagall. That's hashtag AskMcGonagall, and I will try and answer them in the new segment called Professor McGonagall's office hour. Back to the chapter. So in this chapter we get to hear about the prospects of Harry and Dudley for the school that they're going to go to after primary school. Now Dudley is set to go to Smeltings, which is his dad's old school, and even though it's not outright mentioned, Smeltings very much sounds like a public school that is what the British call a private school, very confusingly, but it means that the Dursleys are going to pay a lot of money to have Dudley go there. It also means that there is this family tradition, which is a thing in a lot of the higher end, the more expensive public schools, where you're more likely to get a place at the school if one of your parents has been there. And it sounds like Smeltings is a boys-only school as well, so Dudley would be continuing the tradition down the male line. And I know I'm inferring a lot here just from the name Smeltings and from the description of the school uniform, but my guess would also be that it is a boarding school, just because a lot of the more expensive public schools in the UK are also boarding schools. Now, as a German, the concept of boarding schools confuses me, and I'm just not sure how I feel about it. They are a lot more common here than they are in Germany. Even the concept of public schools, aka private schools, is a lot more common here than in Germany. And it's almost like if you want to give your child the best opportunities later in life, you have to spend a lot of money to send them to public school, because comprehensives or state-run schools are just not able to provide the same amount of education, but more importantly, they're not able to provide the same amount of connections and of networking opportunities. If you look at the data about students that are admitted to the top universities like Oxford and Cambridge, there is a shockingly high amount of people there who have been public school educated. And again, I'm not sure if that is because of the quality of education or if that is because of the connections through teachers and other people who might be able to get a student a place at one of these top universities. Chances are, if you go to a public school, that you are from a wealthy background, you're probably white, you're probably British, you're probably middle class. So public schools, to my liberal socialist mind, are just a relic of a really unfair, unequal system. And in this chapter we see that system play out beautifully, because Dudley, who's the preferred son, really the only son that the Dursleys acknowledge, he is allowed this opportunity. He's allowed to go to this high-end public boarding school where he'll likely get a fantastic education that will allow him into a top university and then into a top paying job, whereas Harry, on the other hand, gets sent to Stonewall High, the local comprehensive. The connotations of the word comprehensive school in the UK are they are state-run, locals, probably quite large schools. So Harry would be in a very large classroom with a lot of students of all different abilities, and the school is run by the state, meaning that they don't have the same amount of funds as a public school would have. So overall, the prospects for Harry aren't great. Fewer students from comprehensive schools go to university, relatively speaking, than from public schools, and the Dursleys clearly don't care. Again, I'm not endorsing the public school system. I think it's vastly unfair that the system is split in this way, where you can essentially buy your children's education. I believe that education should be free for not just anyone, but everyone, whichever slice of society you're from. But as we know, Harry will not go to Stonewall High. Spoilers, he's going to go to Hogwarts. An interesting aspect of the school divide is also that the Dursleys seem okay with keeping Harry in the house, but sending Dudley away to a boarding school. Now, comprehensives are not usually boarding schools, so I expect that Harry would be staying with the Dursleys, and he would then be the only child in the house while Dudley is away at his very expensive boarding school. And that I find interesting. I wonder if the Dursleys really thought that through. So he gets this first letter, and of course, every time I read this chapter, I think, Harry, you fucking idiot, just open the letter. Don't tell your uncle that you have a letter. Just open it right there in the hallway. Read it, hide it. But of course, that's not what he does. To be fair, that's probably not what I would do. And Mr. Dursley manages to take that letter away from him. Now, the chapter is called The Letters from No One, but we know who the letters were from. The letters are from Professor McGonagall, and she does not give up on sending them. Now, I wonder whether this letter sending system is automated, or if it's Professor McGonagall actually doing it, if she has some sort of letters and egg spell, or if it's Hagrid's magic, although from what we see of Hagrid's magic later, it's not that advanced, so my guess is that it is some sort of automated system guided by Professor McGonagall, trying to think of the many ways that she could get a letter to Harry. We also need to remember that letters were still the main written form of communication in 1991. While email did exist, it wasn't really that common to use it for personal use, and that makes it even more interesting that Harry has never received a letter in his life. Although I suppose when you're a 10-year-old child, you don't generally get much written communication. Maybe the kids do these days, I don't know. Again, we see that Harry is actually quite funny. He walks into the kitchen where Aunt Petunia is dyeing some of Dudley's old clothes grey to fit the requirements for the school uniform, and Harry just says, "I didn't realise it had to be so wet." Well done, Harry. That's a good one. Petunia doesn't appreciate it though. As for Dudley, we get even more characterization of him as a violent person. Clearly he's taking after Uncle Vernon in that regard. He's not just hitting people with a stick, and this includes his father as well as Harry. He kicks his mother. We also hear about the broken toys in his second bedroom. He drove over the neighbor's dog with a tank, and he swapped a tortoise for an air rifle. So J.K. Rowling's really not being subtle here in portraying Dudley as a very violent child, as someone who wants to hurt others, including animals and his own family. So when the letter arrives and Harry doesn't get to read it, he has this plan of sneaking up on the postman, meeting the postman at the corner of the street and taking the letter off him. And he does that with the help of, quote, the repaired alarm clock. So Harry finds this broken alarm clock in Dudley's second bedroom and fixes it. Is this a new skill that we never hear about again? Is Harry very good at DIY? Does he even have the tools to fix an alarm clock? And how does he know how to do this? I have so many questions about this, and none of it is explained. Generally speaking, this chapter, I found there are a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of plot holes, a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense. For example, why doesn't Professor McGonagall just have the letter appear in Harry's second bedroom? Why does it have to come inside of the eggs and through the fireplace? Why not have it just pop, just appear on the bed, or even maybe have an owl send it through the window in his bedroom? That's clearly not been thought through very well. Another point that doesn't make sense is, why does Uncle Vernon decide to take the family and leave, first going to that hotel and then second going to the hut on the rock far out in the sea? Was he planning to stay there for weeks and weeks until school time began? That's not a well thought out plan, Uncle Vernon. What the hell were you thinking about? He just takes his family, a couple of crisp packets and some bananas, and drives them out to sea, and then what? It makes for a very atmospheric kind of bit in the chapter, but I really don't think it's very well thought out from a continuity point of view. One interesting tidbit that I noticed this time is the town name of Cokeworth. This is where they first go and they check into this cheap hotel called the Rail View Hotel. And the town name caught my eye, and I realized that that was the town that Severus Snape lives in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. So that means that Cokeworth is Aunt Petunia and Lily Potter's hometown as well as Snape's hometown. I never realized in all of the rereads that that was the same place. Now, the reason that I love the idea of Cokeworth, and I love that chapter in The Half-Blood Prince where we get to see Snape's home, is because it sounds like a place in the Black Country, in the Midlands of England. And that is actually where my husband's family is from, so I'm there on a regular basis. And I picture it very much as my husband's little industrial hometown. I just love the imagery of both Professor Snape and Lily Potter coming from this very grey, old, industrial, rundown place. Even when you go to some of the places in the Black Country today, you feel like you're traveling back in time for some decades. They tend to move very slowly. It's not a very attractive place to live generally. And I apologize to everyone living in the Black Country. I know there are some fantastic places there, and I know you have a very proud history of industry and of factories. It really is the heart of the Industrial Revolution. I think with the few mentions of Cokeworth in this book and in the sixth book, J.K. Rowling has written a really evocative kind of setting for the origin of Snape and of course of Lily and Petunia. I would also guess that Vernon Dursley is not from the Midlands, but that he is in fact from the south of England, and that Petunia maybe deliberately chose someone from the south so she could get away from her industrial working class heritage. We should also note that they end up in Cokeworth and they start in Surrey, and that is quite the journey. It's definitely a few hours in the car to get from the Surrey in the south of England to the Midlands, and they go even further north because they end up by the sea. Now, the Midlands, as you can tell from the name, Midlands are in the middle of the country. So there is no sea anywhere there. So it'll be another few hours in the car to get to the coast, whether that's the east or west coast of England, or maybe even in Wales. So this is where we leave the Dursleys and Harry Potter on the eve of his birthday, sleeping on a cold, hard floor in a tiny hut in the middle of the sea, when he hears a big old knock on the door. And isn't that just the most wonderful cliffhanger? But before we finish this week's edition of Hogwarts Kitchen, we are going to talk about crisps. Uncle Vernon's rations turned out to be a packet of crisps each and 4 bananas. So crisps, or chips as they're called in the US, are a really big deal in the UK. The first thing I noticed when I came here and I bought some crisps is that they come in single serving packets. So you can buy a packet of crisps, which is just a handful of crisps inside a plastic bag, and you can get these single serving packets in multi-packs of 6 up to 32 packs per big bag of crisps. And the flavors are weird. So some of the more traditional crisp flavors here are prawn cocktail, cheese and onion, Worcester sauce. All of them, as horrible as they sound, I prefer to stick with the simple salted crisps, but I know the British really like their unique crisp flavors. One of the weirdest things that supermarkets do when it comes to Christmas or winter holidays is festive crisp flavors. So last year, Tesco, which is the biggest supermarket chain in the UK, had festive flavors including turkey and stuffing, sweet potato and cheese fondue, and even salted caramel and cocoa. That's salted caramel and cocoa flavored potato crisps. Weird, right? But the British just love it. Also popular now are alcohol-flavored crisps, so you get Prosecco-flavored crisps and cider-flavored crisps, and it's all a bit weird. I don't quite get the British love for crisps. They don't just eat crisps as a snack either. They love them as a side with lunch meals like sandwiches and salads, and my husband assures me that a crisp sandwich is a wonderful meal in itself. So that's some crisps between 2 buttered slices of bread. Yes, I have to say I have so far avoided eating that particular British delicacy, but there you go, the British love their crisps. That was it from this week's Hogwarts Kitchen, and that was it for this episode as well. I hope you enjoyed it. Please get in touch with me online. I am on Twitter at twitter.com/haveabiscuitpod. That's twitter.com/haveabiscuitpod. I'm also on Instagram at instagram.com/haveabiscuitpodcast, although that Instagram page is still empty, but you can follow me on there anyway, just in case something shows up. I have a WordPress, which is haveabiscuitpodcast.wordpress.com, and that's where you can listen to all of the episodes. At time of recording, I am still working on getting this podcast on iTunes and on Stitcher. So maybe it's on there already, maybe it isn't. But either way, you can already subscribe to me on Spotify and Google Play. Please do subscribe if you can, it really does help me out. So get in touch with me. I'm probably going to be most active on Twitter. If you have any comments about the show, if you have any questions, post them there, especially if you have any questions for Professor McGonagall for Professor McGonagall's Office Hour using the hashtag AskMcGonagall. I do also have an email address, which is haveabiscuitpodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to email me with any comments. I'll happily read them out on the show and answer any questions that you have. And you can also send in a voicemail if you're feeling particularly brave. Until next week, where we read chapter 4 of the Philosopher's Stone, titled The Keeper of the Keys, and we finally get to meet Hagrid for the second time in the book, really. And always remember, you are a cute little kitty cat at heart, but you do have claws and teeth, so use them. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. Have a Biscuit, Potter was written, hosted and produced by Claudia Falcone. The theme is based on a tarantella by Johann Caspar Merz, and it was performed by Claudia Falcone and produced by Bill Hayes.